First and foremost, I think the business owner or owners need to be committed to getting it done.
Correct.
Whatever they're looking to do, they got to be committed. Let's go see this to the end. All right, Scott, in this video, we're going to be talking about, ready for the drum roll, we're talking about something we had a conversation with our advisors about just this morning. So it's really on the top of our minds, which is business owners, primarily small business owners who are about to enter some sort of transition phase or really thinking about how do I prep my business for that next generation, whether it's internal, it could be other family members, it could be employees that want to buy it, maybe key employees, or it could be third party, just an outright sale. So there's a lot to unwrap there.
Unpack there.
Yeah. So what are the highlights we want to talk about here? Let's kind of bring up what we talked about today.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a psychological component. I think a lot of times somebody who's taken a business from its start, its birth, to something that's grown to be quite successful over decades of time, they tend to be kind of A-type personalities, and they tend to be kind of control freaks. And now they're getting to the point where they're saying, I don't want to go to work every day. I don't want to do this thing that I've done for the past 30 or 40 years every day for the rest of my life. Plus now, my kids are growing into adulthood and they can take that over. So I think the first thing is going to be that, psychological component of turning this thing they've built over to anyone else, including even someone with their own family. Mm-hmm. So the psychological component, and then the practical component, which is just how would I even go about accomplishing something like that? So I've made peace with this fact that I'm going to transition out of this business, and I'm going to sell it to somebody, or I'm going to transition it to one of my key employees or one of my children. How do I go about doing that in a tax favorable way? How do I get the maximum value for my business? How do I use it to generate retirement income after I no longer work there, and feel safe and secure knowing that I'm not going to work every day?
Yeah, there really is a lot to unpack there. When you talk about the psychological, I think the psychological part has to happen first. Yeah. And there's usually, you can mentally get there just by getting burned out on the career or the ownership and running of the company. You could get there by being excited about, can't wait to pass this on to my children if they're interested and involved. Or there could be, I hate to say it, but sometimes there's health scares.
Issues, it's a very common one.
But overall, it's just good planning, right? Mm-hmm. So to sit back and say, I think, it's time, and it might not be that much time you have to do this. You want to do it in a hurry, or in a better world, you do it, build up to it for years, right? Mm-hmm. But another factor here, especially with family businesses, is a lot of times maybe one or two of your children are involved in the business and others are not.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
And so, most parents typically want to leave, everything equally to the kids, which I think is obviously very normal. But if one of them has nothing to do with the business, does it make sense for them to have a third or a quarter or half the business? Is that fair to the other child?
Sure.
Usually it's not. So we get into what we call in our business estate equalization, right? So if mom and dad have this much net worth, but a big chunk of it is a business, but there are some other things. So if one child is interested in taking over that business, you have to kind of value what that's worth and then offset it with the other things that mom and dad own. Yeah. But like you said in one of our other videos, that kind of planning is usually just a snapshot in time.
Sure.
So it's a dynamic world we live in. So you got to make sure it adjusts as things go by. But there's a lot there. And I think, Scott, man, this gets to a point where I see a lot of owners freeze. Yeah. They just I don't even know what to do with this. And the next thing you know,
and lawyers and business brokers and financial advisors.
And they all want to help.
They all want to help.
And they have great ideas.
They all need certain information, and you need to provide it. And it's a lot of research. And
just as you're about ready to do something, the next fire, whatever's going on in your business. Oh, I need help with this. We got to put this out.
Yeah, you're busy in your own business, and something comes up, and you're like, all right, now I've started the planning, but now I'm gonna tell my attorney, I have to put this off 3 months because I've got this thing I got to do. And
that's right. Yeah,
it can take a long time.
Yeah, and so we've been involved in a good number of these, and some of them never get they're sort of a failure to launch, if you will. And,
Sure.
and some of them have transitioned and it's been a great transition. Sometimes it's been rocky.
Yeah.
I think it all depends on, first and foremost, I think the business owner or owners need to be committed to getting it done.
Correct.
Whatever they're looking to do, they got to be committed. Let's go see this to the end.
Yeah.
And
And committed in a long-term way, because I think a lot of people feel an urge of commitment when they have a health scare or they have a stressful few months at work and they're just like, I'm done with this and I'm out.
Right.
But the problem is that wears off, that urgency wears off over time. And so these commitments that you're making to transition a business, they're not a week, they're not a month. You're talking about usually 6 months to a year minimum to do everything that you need to do and get everything in place to transition a business. And so, you have to be ready for doing a lot of things you don't want to do and for taking a lot of extra time that you don't want it to take. And you have to set aside that time in order to do those things.
Yep. Yeah. And let's talk for a second about the players that let's assume that your typical business owner does not have the professional background to do all the valuation, accounting, legal documents, things like that, and potentially insurances. So who do they need on their team?
Yeah. So you're typically depends on your accountant that you have doing your taxes, the business taxes, bookkeeping, and the general accounting for the business. They might have some expertise in being able to value your business, or they might not. There is a specific designated group of financial nerds that specifically appraise and or sell businesses for their careers. And that's they're obviously great resources to try to find out how much your business is worth. A lot of people, including us, we had to go through this process of just trying to understand our business and its future. We're not going anywhere, but at the same time, it's important to plan for unexpected changes, especially for our clients. And so we had to go through this finding process and mathematical finding process of what would some transition look like if we had to do that at some point in the future. And so I think each business owner is going to come through that, and the first stop is realizing that they have probably no idea what the business is worth. If I could sell this, what is it worth? And then the flip side of that coin is, what if I pass away unexpectedly and no one can come to work now because I'm the only one that knows how to open the door of the front office? How much money is my family losing in that scenario? Right. And so it becomes, if you have to fire sale and sell things off as parts, it's usually not worth as much as the whole. And so that's where that appraisers kind of come in. They're going to get a feel for your industry. They're going to get a feel for your specific business. They're going to look at your books. They're going to help you fix your books. Most people are running, small business accounting is typically less rigid and official than a large publicly traded company, for example. And so a lot of times businesses aren't structured very well for sale.
Right.
So, you start as one guy in a room, and then you add another employee, and, add 30 years to that. And now you've got 75 employees, but you never change the way that you structure the business. So it's always, I get revenue, I pay my bills, and then I take whatever's left over.
Right? Yeah.
And so that works as long as you're the only owner and you don't necessarily care about selling the business. But once you start selling the business, the buyer is going to say, all right, I'm not going to operate this business, so I'm going to hire somebody to come in and run it.
Right.
I need to make sure I can pay that person a good wage in order to run the company and make sure they're happy and not leaving for another company. So I have to retain them. I might have to pay better health care benefits to my employees because maybe, this business is kind of a pain to run because you have too much turnover. As soon as you train an employee, they leave for another business because you don't have a good benefits program. So suddenly you start looking at all these different things for structuring the business that you've been dealing with for 30 years because it was just your business, and that's how you stumbled into that way of doing business, and you've done it for 30 years. Yep. But if I'm going to buy that business from you, suddenly I'm thinking, this is just a giant basket of problems.
Right.
If I'm going to buy this business, these 5 things need to be fixed first.
Yeah.
And so the business appraiser and the business broker is going to help you understand, from the buyer's perspective, what is it about your business that they don't want? And then you can take some time. In some cases, especially fixing inventory issues and accounting issues, you could find it takes, 5 years to work off excess inventory, or to hire the right people for the right roles that you need them in, or to consolidate territories and open up new product lines to add additional upsell opportunities. So they can give you some really good insights and points to make your business more attractive to a buyer.
Yeah. One of those things is, and we understand this, we work with a lot of folks that deal with this, is making yourself replaceable.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to do that if you're a contractor and you have an incredible skill set and you have a truck full of tools and you just go out and you do your thing all the time. There's really just the value of the tools by the end of the day, right? But if you're building a crew around what you do, I had to stop going to the construction. Like I grew up doing that, right?
It's better than boats. You used to do boats.
Yeah, I used to do boats. Thanks for reminding me of that. But regardless of what your business is, once it's grown to that point, like you said, if I'm a buyer, I'm coming in and I'm saying, I don't want to do Bob's job. He's there, 60 hours a week. I don't want to do that.
Sure.
I want to pay somebody to do it, but there's no one there. So I'd have to go find somebody, right?
Yeah.
So if you internally can teach folks to do what you're doing and essentially make yourself replaceable. Yeah. I just said this in a meeting yesterday. It's a double-edged sword, because you go, you sit back, you say, nice, I made myself replaceable. And then you go, oh no,
I'm replaceable now.
I made myself replaceable. So
the other interesting part of that is the replacement cost. How much would it cost to replace me? If I had to stop working tomorrow and I had to hire one or several people to do those jobs, how much would that cost? And it's humbling in some cases, both to the positive and negative side, to realize that maybe you're doing way too much and you're worth too much of that value of that business is centered on you. And you bring up the contractor example, where you have one guy and he's got 2 or 3 crew members and he's the only one that really knows what he's doing. He's the one that's going out and finding new clients. He's the only one that knows how to work the certain high-end tools. He's the only one that knows how to craft a perfect cabinet. And if he dies, the business just ends, because there's the only real value there is in that single person.
That's right.
And so, a business consultant would come in and say, hey, you know what? You're doing too much. You need to hire somebody that can absorb some of your skill sets so that you can spread that risk across multiple people and make your business worth more, because a buyer is not going to buy a single person. They're going to buy a business.
Right. And I think the other aspect there is when you get yourself to a point where you're replaceable and you find out that, I'll just use hypothetical numbers. So you were finding out that you were making $150,000 a year. You were taken out of the business, but you've realized that for $100,000, you could put somebody in that same seat doing pretty much what you do every day.
Right.
But then there's an extra $50,000 now that you can take out of that business as the owner. So you really start to tap into the equity value. You really start to identify the equity value of your business, not just the actual 8 to 5 o'clock or whatever, however many hours you work. It's not the hourly part. So the equity, and that's a really big thing. It's really the hardest part for people to really quantify, because they've usually just been taking whatever's left, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
That's what I take home every year, and I have good years and bad years. But as a potential buyer, most buyers often just want the equity portion.
They're buying the profit, which rolls up into the equity. So if you have to determine how much profit. Most small businesses never go to that length, really. They just say there's $100,000 left at the end of the year, so I'm going to take $100,000. Where if you salaried yourself at $80,000, then that means that there's $20,000 left of profit. And that's what somebody's going to buy if they're going to buy your business, because they don't want to operate your business typically. Some buyers might, but typically the buyer's not going to want to operate the business, so they're going to hire somebody to replace you in that role, and they're only going to keep what's left over. So if your business, at the end of the day, you're taking $100,000 off that business, and they're looking at buying it, and they're going to say, well, I think I could find somebody qualified to replace them for $80,000 a year. That means there's $20,000 of profit in that business. And then they'll apply the industry standard multiples to that profit margin and come up with a number that they're willing to buy your business for.
Yeah. We got distracted. We went down a different rabbit hole here. But so the players that you typically need involved, I would say an attorney and a good accountant. And obviously I would prefer a financial advisor involved in there because part of the process of transitioning to a new owner is you extracting the value from that business. And then what do you do with that value?
Right.
Usually the attorney is going to go, that's not my thing. The accountant's going to go, wherever you want to invest it, go ahead. But that's where we usually come in.
Right.
And the importance of all those players, all those professionals helping you, I think it's very important. My recommendation is work with somebody in those categories that you just have trust in and that you believe will play well with others.
Sure.
Because we've seen this where, there's disagreement and it kind of not only just bogs down, sometimes it causes it to come to a halt and you got to go hire a different attorney or a different accountant that might play better.
Yeah.
That's really frustrating.
It is.
And oftentimes it causes the whole thing to fail. But when you're putting all these pieces that you just talked about together, the idea of it just going flawlessly is really naive.
Right.
All right. So it's time to get people that can roll up their sleeves and say, hey, I don't know if I agree with your valuation. I was thinking this. And then the other person has to say, well, I understand where you're coming from, but here's my reasoning.
Sure.
And let's meet in the middle, or one of us acquiesce to the other and let's get this thing done.
Yeah.
And they have to keep you informed. They have to make sure, hey, we're still working on this. We're waiting for this valuation to come back. We're waiting on this report or whatever.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's so easy to get tripped up along the way and it gets really frustrating.
It is. Yeah. And there's some subcategories you were talking about, attorney. So in a typical business sale or business transition, you're going to have your kind of corporate law attorney that's going to help you draft the buy and sell agreements and make sure you have financing in place and all of that. But then there's also the estate planning attorneys, which also tend to come into play there. So if you're transitioning from the first generation to the second generation, and let's say you are an attorney and you're transferring the law firm to your daughter, then, but you also have other children who are not attorneys, then you have some estate planning issues there because you're giving a ton of value to one of your children, but not the other two. And that's where that estate plan maximum equalization comes into play.
Yep.
And so you might need several different types of attorneys in play and having that quarterback to coordinate it. And that's kind of where the financial advisor a lot of times will come in, is coordinating all these different pieces and matching them all up, finding you qualified people to fill those roles, and then making sure they do their jobs and coordinate together.
I should just be cautious on saying it. Not a knock on everybody in our industry, but not all financial advisors are sort of equipped to handle this kind of complexities. I know we've done a lot of it, but there are advisors out there who are strictly, life insurance with a little bit of investments or mutual funds and things like that. And that's probably not who I'd want quarterbacking this whole deal. I'd look for somebody with experience and somebody that knows how to manage those relationships and keep things moving and getting things done.
Yep. So. And there are business consultants that will come in that it depends on, your geography and how large your business is, but some will find them prohibitively expensive in some cases due to their larger fees than they're used to working with larger companies. But you can get a pure business consultant that will come in and do all this stuff for you.
Yep. Make it a smoother ride. So I think that's great. I appreciate the time. I think we didn't necessarily solve everything, but there's a lot to think about. And I guess the point is, and I'll just add this one other thing. We kept saying, if you're transitioning to your kids, there's a lot of people that transition their business to other people, no relation, or to their employees. Like I said earlier, a couple key employees, those are all those options out there. But if you're really looking at it like, hey, I think it's time for me to start thinking about it, certainly you can call us, but look for, if you're not calling us, look to whoever you have that you've worked with real closely through the years and maybe built up that trust level. Maybe whether it's an attorney, an accountant, or some other professional, start there and ask them their opinion. If they're well established, they're well connected and understand what's going on, they'll probably be able to help maybe introduce you to some others that are kind of filling those other roles. So thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you.